kind of the last category that we can talk about is the idolatry of Israel in the wilderness, and this happens on multiple occasions, but maybe is best summed up in the creation of the golden calf. Now, it's not so certain with the actual golden calf situation if they were creating their own god or trying to create worship of the true God in their own way. But there are other situations that they find themselves in where they're clearly creating idols and worshiping false gods. Now, one of the things that happens in this story of the golden calf is when Moses comes down, he breaks the tablets, the Ten Commandments. What do you think is happening with that? Is he just mad and just lost his temper, or is there something more going on with him breaking those tablets?
Obviously he could just be exceedingly angry, and obviously those tablets do get a replacement. But obviously it could just be, they used to tear their clothes, and it was a physical manifestation of this, an actual spiritual state. And man, there's not a better physical manifestation of the actual spiritual state of the Israelites than breaking the law.
Right. And really creating another God is kind of the ultimate in breaking the law, right? Because if the law is a reflection of who God is, if it has to do with his character and nature, then really the ultimate in covenant breaking is creating a new God to worship. Because God's identity is wrapped up in the law, right? From the standpoint of it, it's a reflection of him. It's a reflection of his character. And if you're creating another God, then you're destroying all of that. You're going to be doing something completely different. Each one of us would know people who met Christians that were just not great people and turned away from God as a result of that. And there's an element of us saying, well, that's unfair, because who God is a separate thing from the way that his people sometimes act. And obviously there's some truth to that. But there's also something very interesting in the fact that, if God is making his appeal through us, then if you're an ambassador to the United States and you walk into, you're in France and you walk into the French Prime Minister's office and you start throwing things around, you're representing the United States, and that is an act of the United States. It's not just an act because there's your identity and the United States identity is wrapped up. Now that goes in your favor a lot, right? You get invited to parties, you get honors, you get benefits of all this stuff because you're an ambassador. That's why people want to be ambassadors. But there's also a heavy responsibility that comes with it. If there's this exchange of identities that goes on where you are the United States. In the same way, when God has a covenant with us, there's an exchange of identities. When God says to Israel, I will be your God and you will be my people, it completely matters whether or not they are going to live up to the terms of the covenant. It completely matters whether they're going to live by the law. Because God's reputation is on the line. And it's not like that's a small thing, because his purpose in creating this covenant with Israel is to be a light to the world, that they'll see who God is and they'll see the blessings of God. And that can't happen if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And when they're worshiping these other gods, when they're creating other gods out of whole cloth, obviously that destroys all of this. So one of the things that happens here is that when Israel worships this golden calf is that they're made to drink it. So what do you make of that?
That's a great question. Obviously, anybody who's sat through your Bible study over the years will recognize the word incorporation.
Right.
And looking at the act of communion and stuff like that, and incorporation, and talking about Jesus saying, "I'll spew you out of my mouth." Well, what are you doing in there to begin with?
Right.
Incorporation, and so maybe it's this. It's right along those lines. Like, this is your God. Well, I'm going to have you incorporate your God here in the fullest sense and see the foolishness of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting that, they can incorporate a God whose spirit by living out the law, right? By being transformed into his likeness. There's a unity that's had through that. But if they have an idol, if they have a physical God, then really how are they going to incorporate it other than eating it? And so he kind of says, hey, you're going to choose this as your God? Let's make it your God. And there's a thing that happens later on called the trial of jealousy. And this seems to be something that's related to that, where later on in the law, if a husband was jealous of his wife, he could kind of have her go do this trial of jealousy where she had to drink certain things. And this seems to be related to that, and it seems to be related to the idea of a test that is being done to see kind of if they've incorporated, or if they're to see if they have really made this God their God. And it's interesting that God does that. And I think that, this seems odd to us, but in reality, this is the way that you really determine who your God is, right? What you have incorporated is your God. And so we can say all we want to that Christ is our God. We can say all we want to that we're Christians. So many people wear the name of Christ, but in reality, it's have you what are you incorporating in your life? What are you manifesting in your life? That really shows what your God is. And there's an aspect of this that's kind of important, because one of the things that God institutes in the law is the idea of taking his name in vain. And we often think about that as being, saying God or saying Jesus just randomly. That's taking God's name in vain. But that's not exactly what that commandment is talking about. It's talking about wearing God's name to no effect, meaning taking the name of God, taking the name of Christian, and not living out that. And so I think that really that's kind of what's happening in that situation where Moses comes down the mountain and makes them drink this idol that they've created is if you're going to wear God's name, it needs to matter. So any thoughts on kind of the application of this?
I think, as a Christian, you can look at this as an opportunity for self-reflection and give yourself a test.
Right.
And, and just say, hey, are there areas where I'm falling short? Are there areas where, people would look at me and I would be a poor example of an ambassador for Christ? Mm-hmm. Or are there areas where I've compromised and things of that sort? But also you just realize, there's an innate desire in all of us to create a God out of our own, fashioning, rather than worshiping the God that is. And it's a slippery slope. And sometimes it's just a result of, the uncertainties of life or something, or sometimes it's just, wanting a God that submits to your will rather than submitting to his. Mm-hmm. But I think it's, even for people who've spent good swaths of their life in the church, there's still a strong temptation to fashion God after your own desires.
Yeah, yeah. And it's important to understand that in that evaluation is not just self-recrimination, but it's the seeking out of blessing, because God is making his appeal through you, and his desire is to bless you. It's not like you say, well, am I living up to this? And it's all doom and gloom. I don't want to miss out on the blessings that God has for me. So I want to see where I want to have that good life. I want to be blessed. I want to have those things. And so it's not only something that God deserves, but it's something that results in great blessing to me if I do find these areas where I'm not living up to what I should be doing. So there's a lot to see here in these stories, and they bear all kinds of study and scrutiny. But we'll see you guys next time.